Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today I'll be going through the intra-regional and extra-regional migration in the Caribbean, and that's after 1838 to present day, and also the systems of production. This video is going to be a bit shorter than usual, but after this we will go into the different responses of the Caribbean people to oppression and genocide. So we'll be talking about resistance, revolution, development of peasant groups, revolutions, I said that already, rebellions, revolts, stuff like that, the R words, and then we'll move into the movement towards independence. So the next video should be longer, but let's just get into what we have here. So first, let's talk about the intra-regional and the extra-regional migration. Intra meaning within, so that means moving from different Caribbean territories to other Caribbean territories. Extra meaning out, so we're moving from Caribbean territories to territories outside the Caribbean region, and this is how the Caribbean diaspora is formed. So if you don't know what diaspora is, go watch the first video on the different definitions of the Caribbean. I'm going to I think you can just click the eye. I'm going to put it as a tag or a card right there in the top. I use my left hand, so that's the top right of this video now. Also, let's talk about these different migrations. All right, so first let's talk about Santo Domingo. The Chinese migrated to the south half of the island of Hispaniola, and by this time around 1844, Santo Domingo was known as the Dominican Republic. The name was changed to the Dominican Republic. And by the 1900s, there were about 30 to 32 Chinese residents that were originally immigrants from the from the United States. And after some time, they started moving within the Caribbean region, and that is where we saw intra-regional as well as inter-regional migration by the Chinese to countries such as Trinidad and Tobago, British Guiana, which is now known as Guyana, and Jamaica. Almost said Benin, but that's a different thought in my head when Benin was called Dahomey, and that's how they voodoo. That's totally unrelated topic, but that has to do with Tainos and their religion, Benin Dahomey religion. But not the point of this video, so let's not get off track. Now, Panama. Residents of different Caribbean territories started migrating to Panama around the time when the construction of the Panama Canal began in 1881. And these migrants were first on the payroll of the French until 1904, when the British took over the construction of the wall. Not the wall, the canal. Whoa, I have a lot of double thoughts going on today. I don't know what's up. Anyways, so the migrants were on the French payroll until 1904, when the British took over the construction of the canal. And then when the British took over, of course, these migrants were now on the British payroll. And of course, with this contract that they were on, if they had any disputes about it, they would be sent home immediately to their countries. So, if you didn't agree with what is going on, you don't have to be here. You're getting paid. That was the kind of thing that was happening at the time. You also know, as per extra-regional migration, we see this every day, where people leave the Caribbean to go to the United States, the United Kingdom, even China, Japan, South Korea, countries like that. But during the period between 1948 to 1971, when people were moving to the United Kingdom from the Caribbean region, these people or these migrants were labeled as the Windrush generation. and it refers to the people who went on the MV Empire Windrush ship and docked in Tilbury on June 22, 1948. And these migrants were people from countries and islands like Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and many other islands who went there to help with the post-war labor shortages. So, with migration, people left because of poverty, not having money, so they had to move away in order to get a better quality of life and to be better able to provide for their families. So like the US dollar would be more for the Jamaican dollar per se. So you're earning US dollars, it's more in Jamaican. So that's how that's the main reason why it would help their families. And so an advantage of going or migrating would be for remittances, and that's a sum of money sent in payment or as a gift. So, according to the BOJ, one of the largest sources of foreign exchange to Jamaica is remittances. And remittances are an essential source of financing to many Jamaican recipients, which is used to supplement households' income for necessities such as food, utilities, and even education. And of course, you saw where people left the Caribbean region in order to get an education elsewhere. And we also see people coming into the Caribbean to get an education at universities such as UWI, that's the University of the West Indies, at either the Mona campus or the Cave Hill campus or even the St. Augustine campus in Trinidad and Tobago. All right? Now, there are also disadvantages really to migration for the Caribbean itself. We're going to speak about social disadvantages first. So you have acculturation, and acculturation is a process of social, psychological, and cultural change that stems from the balancing of two cultures while adapting to the prevailing culture of a society. So it is possible for a person who moves away to lose their culture in a sense and be overwhelmed or overcome by another culture, and that would be the prominent culture that they go by now, seeing that they no longer practice the culture of their homeland. You also have culture shock, and this is basically the personal deorientation of that a person may feel when experiencing an unfamiliar way of life due to immigration or a visit to a new country or move between social environments. And there are 5 stages of culture shock. Hostility and irritability is the first stage. You get a bit hostile towards yourself and even to others, and you're a bit irritable because you're in a new environment and you're trying your best to figure out how to get yourself around it and wrapped around it and adjusted, but it's not an easy process because you're going through stuff that you're not used to. Then you have the gradual adjustment until you get to adaptation. And when you get to the adaptation stage, you have now gotten to the point where you have accepted where you are now and what's happening, and you are able to live your life in like the rhythm of what's happening around you. I know you're in sync with the waves or the vibrations that's happening now. And then the last stage is re-entry travel shock, when you have to go back to your country of origin, and that's hard now to adjust again to a somewhat new culture, even though it's not new. But you got so used to the new culture that when you have to go back to your original culture, it seems a bit hard. But it's not. So that is really it for, the different intra and extra regional migration. And now let's talk about the systems of production. And the first one, let's speak about the slash and burn and the fallow system. Now, the slash and burn system of agriculture was carried out where the heavy forestry would be cut, and that would be the slashed part, after which the cut vegetation is burnt, and it's believed that the ashes provide the soil with nutrients and increases the soil's fertility. Now, after that slash and burn, the indigenous people would leave the land to reforest naturally. So they leave it to again to grow trees and weeds and all that by itself. They would not farm on that land after harvesting, because after farming or refarming and replanting on land and harvesting, and then right after you plant on the land again, and then you cut, harvest, plant again, after a while the soil will become exhausted and will no longer be able to grow any crops. And this method of shift cultivation employed by the indigenous people was a way of sustainability for their subsistence agriculture. All right? So this, of course, is not really legal. Let's say that legal in some countries or some areas, because of the whole burning aspect. The burning releases a lot of carbon dioxide and increases the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, and that's not good for ozone and the atmosphere overall, and we as humans and other animals, it's not good. All right? But this was the indigenous. No, girl. This was the indigenous people's way. I was going to say indigenous people's way of farming, and they found it to be not only sustainable but very effective. So when they went to get another land, they would perform rituals to check if there are any forces or spirits there. And if there were, they wouldn't farm on that land because they wouldn't want to upset the spirits. So that was their way of life, and that was their culture in a sense, as per agriculture. You also had the Encomienda system. Okay, let's talk a bit about the Encomienda system. Now, the word encomienda comes from the Spanish verb encomendar, which means to trust or entrust, sorry. And the encomienda system basically was a Spanish labor system that rewarded Spanish conquistadors, colonial officials, priests, and Spanish settlers on the Caribbean territories. And what this enabled these people to obtain was the land, the people, and also the people that were on the land. They also were able to obtain kinds such as gold and silver and any other precious metals that they could find. All right? And in return for this, that's what separated the encomienda system from the repartimento system. In the encomienda system, the indigenous people were hypothetically given something in return or benefits in return. The benefits that they were given were the ability to learn the Catholic faith or the Christian faith, not really the same thing, but the Christian faith, more specifically the Catholic faith, from the Spanish, as well as the Spanish protection. But after some time, it was found out that this encomienda system was really not beneficial for both parties at all. It was only still beneficial solely for the Spanish, because the indigenous people had already had their religion. They had already had their own methods of protecting themselves from the day-to-day danger that they would encounter. So they didn't ask for the Spanish's help to protect them. So the Spanish basically came onto their land and said, if you are going to work for us and in return we will give you this. So that was our revised system in instead of just forcing you to work for nothing. So the Spanish said they were giving them something. But eventually they saw that this Encomienda system was not working out, and they went back to the repartimento system in about 1550, where they revised the rules and regulations of that system. Eventually they found that that was not working either, and eventually both systems were dissolved. So that's basically what the Encomienda system and the repartimento was. This should have also came up before I move on. This should have also came up. Bartolome de las Casas. He was a Spanish historian and priest who was a landowner as well, and he took part in the serfdom system, and he became someone who disputed the way in which the indigenous people were treated in Dominica. And that was when they also went into the revision of the Encomienda to see if it were really if it was really beneficial for both parties or solely for the Spanish. And that's where social reform began for these two systems. Now, let's talk about the slavery and the plantation system. Now, slavery is forced labor, and in the Americas, slavery was sparked in the Americas due to the high death rate of the indigenous people because of the introduction of European diseases. Now, as I said in the previous video, of course, the indigenous people had their own diseases, but not at the caliber of diseases that the Europeans had brought. Those were new diseases that they were never ever exposed to, so they have no immunity to these types of diseases, and as a result they were dying because of that. So the Europeans needed new labor. They needed laborers. They needed people to work for them, and so that is how they started the slave trade. And really, I also asked if slavery was already a part of the European culture before they even discovered the New World, having Jewish slaves and Muslim slaves and even Moors. Why did they take Africans to the Caribbean as slaves? And ultimately, I said that it was because of the climate. They believed that the blacks were better able to withstand the warmer temperatures than if they brought whites here. And so slavery began with the Europeans mining gold and eventually silver, because if you're taking and not giving back, of course it's going to finish, deplete. So, of course, the gold mines and the silver mines got exhausted, and they had to shift to agriculture. They started out with planting tobacco, but of course that didn't work out very well because of Virginia. Virginia was dominating the tobacco trade at the time. So they had to find some other means of making money, because remember that the Europeans wanted to increase the wealth of their nations through whatever they got from the New World. And so they started coffee farming, and that didn't work out for very long. And then they went on to sugar, which was being dominated by Brazil at the time, because the Portuguese got Brazil because of the Treaty of Tordesillas. And at the time, before, let's say, around remember the date, 16th century. Yes, I'm correct. The 16th century, the Portuguese were dominating the slave trade because of the Treaty of Tordesillas, because they were only allowed, or they only got the the country of Brazil from the Treaty of Tordesillas, so they controlled the slave trade as well, seeing that the let's say the Spanish got whatever was west of the line of demarcation. So that's how it was until the English came and took over the slave trade in the 17th century. And this was because, as I said, the Treaty of Tordesillas was to solve beef between Spain and Portugal, and it didn't concern any other European countries. And as I said, it was fair game for the other European countries believed that the Caribbean therefore was fair game because the Treaty of Tordesillas did not concern them at all. So that's really it. So the Europeans practiced chattel slavery, and this was where the enslaved people and their offspring, don't put an S on offspring were property of the plantation owners, and the white people, this is just a word that you can add to your vocabulary if you don't know it already. Bakra refers to the white slave drivers, white men, or the plantation owners. Eventually, the local slaves got tired of the bad treatment and the brutality, and they started rebelling. So revolts broke out and rebellions were sparked around 1789, and 1789 was the beginning of the French Revolution, and that would lead up to the starting of the Haitian Revolution in 1791. And you'd see people like Francois Duvalier, Jean-Claude Duvalier, Francois Macandal as well, Vincent Auger. Vincent Auger wasn't like, I think he was white. But when we go through the rebellions and stuff and revolts, we'll go more into that. But let's leave it on the surface there for now. But Carib, I've realized, is a reading subject, and I'm actually enjoying the reading. So it's really interesting, really, to know what happened, what caused so many things to happen. And now I'm already beginning to see why certain things are happening, or why so many of us behave how we behave. Because, of course, culture does influence how a society and a culture develops. And I spoke about indentureship as well on the last video, but I'm going to again. But when this was another system of production, the indentureship, and this included people coming from Asia to work on the sugar plantations, and they chose Asians because by this time, for most of the territories in the Caribbean, slavery was abolished, and it was no longer, the whites were no longer, or the Europeans were no longer allowed to have slaves. So they had to start the indentureship process, or the also known as the apprenticeship process, where they got people to work for small wages from Asia. And this now developed a plural society where in the Caribbean there was now a diversity of ethnic groups which resided here. So you had Indians, you had the Chinese, and you also had the blacks who didn't leave. So yeah, we had that's where the melting pot started to kind of come together. And the Chinese and the Indians who came to the West Indies to work on the sugar plantations, however, did not like the work conditions. So when their contracts were up, they left the plantations to open shops in the towns and stuff. So the reason for indentureship or apprenticeship being introduced was because of the 1833 Act that abolished slavery, which took effect in 1834. So by 1834, these whites or Europeans weren't allowed to have slaves anymore. And of course, not many people or not everybody rather, adhered to this rule. You had illegal slave smugglers, but eventually slavery ended, and by 1838, apprenticeship had ended altogether. And by 1838, that's when the movement towards independence began, and Haiti became the first Black republic in the Western Hemisphere in 1804, and that was before apprenticeship had ended in other Caribbean territories. But that's a whole new story to why they got it so early. They actually started moving towards independence way earlier than the other territories. But I guess that's it for this video, so you know what to do. And as always, if you are hearing this, that means you've made it to the end of the video. So congratulations. So you know what to do. Like, subscribe for more, and hit me up on Instagram. By the way, I think I'm going to temporarily disable the business account on Instagram, but I'm not sure about that yet. But drop some comments down below, and until next time, I guess